As the signatures of greed hovered over paper, a soft voice whispered, "Don't sign that." Time froze, and in that stillness Richard felt something he hadn't in years, the quiet presence of God. Maybe this girl wasn't a waitress at all. Maybe she was grace in disguise. Richard Wallace was the architect of his own huge company, built on pure hard work, cold decisions, and the firm belief that money was the measure of a person. He had great power, but felt totally alone. The cold marble floors of his penthouse matched the chill in his heart. His wife had left years ago, and his son only spoke to his accountants. Richard lived alone in a cage made of gold. Tonight, the grand suite of the Waldorf Astoria was filled with the heavy air of ambition and expensive leather. Richard, surrounded by a group of smart, older executives, was about to sign a massive merger, the Apex contract. It was a deal that would make him billions, but would also crush countless small businesses and destroy thousands of jobs. As Richard picked up the solid gold Mont Blanc pen, everyone held their breath, waiting for the stroke that would confirm their fortunes. The silence was broken, not by a cheer, but by a quiet, unsure voice. "Don't sign that." The words, spoken in clear, steady English, came from a young woman named Emily. She was a temporary server, usually unnoticed, moving through the room with trays of chilled water. She stood near Richard's elbow, her hands trembling slightly, yet her gaze was fixed firmly on the contract. The table instantly froze. The four powerful men stared at her as if she were out of her mind. Sharp, mocking laughter broke the tension. Mr. Sterling, a silver-haired partner, leaned forward with a condescending smirk. "Well, look what we have here. It seems the help wants to join the meeting. Back to work, dear. This is big business, not a Sunday chat." Richard didn't move. His gaze, usually a quick look away, stayed focused on Emily. "And why exactly shouldn't I sign this, Miss—" Richard's voice was low and dangerously calm. Emily took a deep breath, her heart pounding. While pouring water earlier, a name on the contract summary, Wallace Enterprises vs. Local Co-ops, had caught her eye. She remembered her father's tired face, his fight to keep his small bakery alive, and the ultimate loss that broke him. "Sir, I saw the terms. This contract, it's meant to intentionally hurt and take over dozens of small local businesses. Businesses like my father's bakery. He gave his life to that store only for a greedy tactic to wipe him out," Emily explained, her voice gaining strength. "You're not just trading money. You're dealing with people's lives, their security, their dignity." Sterling scoffed. "Feelings don't belong on a balance sheet, young lady. That's called creative destruction, getting rid of the inefficient ones." Emily ignored him. She focused on Richard, whose expression was changing from cold annoyance to something she couldn't name. Before she spoke, she had silently closed her eyes, holding the glass pitcher, and prayed, "God, please give me the strength to speak the truth. Please let my whisper be heard." When she opened her eyes, a sudden, strong courage had replaced her fear. Richard Wallace, a man who controlled billions, suddenly felt paralyzed by those three simple, whispered words. "Don't sign that." He held the pen ready to sign, but he couldn't see the line. He only saw a flow of numbers and people. For decades, he had seen business as just math, a game of profit and loss. Now, Emily's voice had given the loss column a human face. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in 30 years, the noise of the corporate world faded. He heard the faint, warm memory of his childhood kitchen. He saw himself as a boy, sitting at a wobbly table, holding his parents' hands. Before every meal, they would bow their heads and pray, "Thank you, Lord, for this simple bread and for the peace of this family. May we always find enough to share." Simplicity, peace, share. Words he had forgotten long ago. He opened his eyes and looked at the contract, a symbol of greed, and then at Emily, a symbol of courage. He realized he had built an empire only to become a king of nothingness. He had power and money, but he was desperately lonely with a cold heart. He remembered the Bible's question, "For what good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul?" Slowly and carefully, Richard Wallace put the Mont Blanc pen down. It made a soft clink on the table. "I won't sign it," Richard announced. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a kingdom. The reaction was explosive. "Are you crazy, Richard?" Sterling shot up, his face red with rage. "This is a $20 billion deal. We have approvals. This girl, this nobody, speaks a few words and you stop." "The deal is dead," Richard repeated, looking into Sterling's angry eyes. "If it costs $20 billion to keep a small piece of my integrity, then it's the best investment I've made all year. You are free to go." The partners argued furiously, grabbing their things and leaving the table, a chaotic exit driven by their anger and failed greed. When the room was finally empty except for Richard and Emily, a heavy silence returned. Emily stood stiffly, sure she would be fired or worse. Richard turned to her. He didn't look angry. He looked exhausted, like a man who had finished a long, unexpected race. He walked toward her, and Emily took a nervous step back. He stopped, keeping his distance. "Thank you, Emily," he said simply, his voice a little rough. "You didn't just stop a contract. You stopped a man who was heading straight for ruin. You spoke the truth that my own conscience had forgotten how to say." He didn't fire her. He thanked her. Emily could only nod, tears welling up, not from fear, but from shock and relief. The next morning, Richard couldn't forget Emily's words, the childhood prayer, or her brave, scared face. He didn't go to the office. He locked himself in his study and pulled up the full files for the dead Apex contract. He spent hours following the details, and the horrible truth emerged. The deal was based on holding down wages, illegal work practices, and purposely destroying local economies. It was deeply wrong. "I have become a parasite," he mumbled, the realization hitting him hard. Richard not only formally canceled the deal and paid the huge financial penalty, but he started a journey. He drove, not in his fancy armored car, but in a plain car, to the neighborhoods his company had quietly ruined. He visited the closed shops, the empty factories, and the community centers, trying to hold on to hope. He met the small business owners, the jobless single parents, and the families who had lost everything. He listened, truly listened, perhaps for the first time since he was a boy. He saw their quiet strength and deep faith, the very things he had given up. He started to learn what it meant to be a neighbor, not just a conqueror. His life, once defined by chasing the next billion, was now defined by seeking forgiveness. 6 months later, Richard announced the creation of the Second Chance Fund. It was a radical shift of his wealth, not just a simple corporate charity. The Second Chance Fund was dedicated to giving zero-interest loans and grants to local entrepreneurs recovering from tough times, offering job training and debt help for single parents, rebuilding communities damaged by corporate greed. He called Emily to his office, no longer as a server, but as a potential partner. "Emily," Richard said, standing by the vast window overlooking a transformed New York skyline, "I need you to run this foundation. You have the most valuable thing in this entire city, a heart and a courage that this world needs more than all the money I possess." Emily, now calm and confident, accepted. Richard's company, Wallace Enterprises, completely changed its operations, paying fair wages, buying ethically, funding local education, and shifting from a greedy model to a supportive one. The business that once stood for cold capitalism became a symbol of humanity in business. 1 year after the dramatic refusal, the Second Chance Fund hosted its first celebration, a sold-out, joyful event attended by hundreds of rehabilitated business owners and thriving families. Richard, looking noticeably older but much happier, introduced Emily to the stage. Emily looked out at the sea of faces, people who had survived, rebuilt, and found hope again. She spoke not about money or contracts, but about the power of faith and the smallest acts of courage. "Look around this room," Emily said, her voice full of emotion. "Every one of us was given a second chance by God's grace and by one man's change of heart. We often think that change requires huge actions, big fights, or loud speeches." She paused, looking directly at Richard, who was wiping a tear from his cheek. "But sometimes all it takes is a small action, a moment of deep moral clarity, or even just a whisper," she concluded. "A whisper can travel further and reach deeper than 1,000 speeches. It's the sound of the conscience finally speaking louder than the noise of the world." The entire audience rose in a long, roaring, standing ovation. The applause was for the profound truth she had spoken. Richard Wallace stood there, weeping openly, not tears of financial loss, but the tears of a man finally, completely saved. He had found the truth he had prayed for decades ago in his mother's kitchen, a life defined by giving and faith. Though simpler in wealth, was far richer than the cold, shining life he had once led. The contract had been canceled, but his soul had been signed over to redemption.